You ever get that weird feeling when you're talking to someone?
What kind of feeling?
Like they look human, they sound totally normal, but there's this, I don't know, this sense that maybe not everything's clicking, that something important is, well, missing inside.
Yeah. That uncanny sense. Like an inner hollowness almost.
Exactly. Hollowness, you kind of shake it off, right? I think maybe you're just reading too much into it.
Mm-hmm. We tend to dismiss those gut feelings sometimes.
But what if that intuition, that little nagging doubt, is actually picking up on something? Well, something real, something profound.
It's fascinating you start there because that very sense that not everyone seems fully present is something thinkers have grappled with for ages. And today we're really going to dive into a particularly, let's say, challenging perspective on this.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Whose perspective are we talking about?
Primarily Helena Blavatsky.
Blavatsky, co-founder of the Theosophical Society, Isis Unveiled, The Secret Doctrine. Those are dense works with some pretty radical ideas.
They absolutely are. And one of the most potentially unsettling concepts she explored, the one we're focusing on, is this idea that not everyone walking around in a human body actually possesses a fully developed soul. That inner spark we usually take for granted.
Right. The idea that just looking human doesn't automatically mean you have that core consciousness. It's a bit chilling.
It is. And to really get it, you have to understand how she saw our makeup. The physical body, for her, was fundamentally a vehicle, a vessel.
Okay, a vessel. Makes sense.
But her argument was that not all these vessels are equally, let's say, inhabited by a conscious individual soul. It really forces you to reconsider what being human actually entails.
It really does. Like there's a spectrum of soulfulness almost. Is that fair?
That's one way to think about it. And she wasn't entirely alone in hinting at something like this. You know, you see echoes of it elsewhere.
Like who?
Well, think about Gurdjieff talking about people living as machines.
Right, just reacting, not really conscious.
Or Manly P. Hall, who often warned about being spiritually asleep. And even in literature, like Dostoevsky, his characters are often wrestling with the very essence of their being, finding or losing their souls in the process.
So they're all touching on this theme of inner awareness or the lack of it.
Exactly, in their own distinct ways. So our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack Blavatsky's concept, what we might call the human shell, drawing on her work, but also seeing how these other perspectives, Gurdjieff, Hall, Dostoevsky, shed light on it. We want to understand this idea of the shell, what it implies about being truly human, and maybe most importantly, the journey of soul development.
Okay, sounds like a heavy but important topic. Where do we start with Blavatsky's definition of this human shell?
Right. So we mentioned the body as a vessel. Blavatsky also talks about the astral husk.
Astral husk, what's that?
Imagine like the energetic blueprint or pattern of a person. The astral husk is sort of like that form, and this is the key part. She suggested it could persist, could exist without being fully animated by a truly conscious individual soul.
So it's like the shape is there, but the animating principle, the real consciousness, might be weak or missing, like an echo.
That's a good analogy, an echo or maybe an impression left behind. The form can go through the motions, mimic life even, but the driver, the conscious you, isn't fully engaged or maybe hasn't fully moved in, so to speak.
Moved in. Interesting phrasing.
And she really digs into this in The Secret Doctrine. She argues that the soul isn't just automatically there at birth. It's not the default human setting.
Really? So what is it then?
It's something that needs to be actively awakened, she says, developed, even earned.
Earned. Wow. That implies work, effort.
Absolutely. It suggests a process, a journey of inner growth, conscious choices, facing things within yourself. It's not a given. Blavatsky frames it more like an achievement.
So if someone hasn't done that inner work or isn't actively doing it, they might just be operating on a more surface level without that deep conscious core.
That's the implication, and this connects directly to the idea of conditioned behavior. Blavatsky hints that these, shells might function largely based on learned responses, societal programming.
Like running on scripts.
Exactly. Pre-programmed scripts. They can navigate social interactions, say the right things, maybe even show learned emotions, but it lacks that authentic, self-aware spark. That quality that comes from a genuinely cultivated soul. It's like they're on autopilot.
That is, unsettling, sophisticated automatons almost.
Yeah.
Which brings us right back to Gurdjieff, doesn't it? His whole humans as machines idea.
It really does. Gurdjieff's perspective aligns incredibly well here. He insisted that most people live in a state of sleep,
Sleepwalking through life?
functioning mechanically, driven by habits, reacting to external stuff, commands, suggestions, social pressures. He felt they lacked real self-will, genuine conscious choice,
Until what?
until they make a deliberate, sustained, conscious effort to wake up. For Gurdjieff, it wasn't necessarily that the potential wasn't there, but that it remained dormant, unactivated.
So it's not that people are inherently soulless in his view, but that the soulfulness is latent. It needs conscious effort to bring it online.
That's a key distinction, yes. He believed humans have the potential for real consciousness, for developing what could be called a soul, but it's rarely realized without that intentional inner work. Most remain, in his terms, machines.
Driven by things outside themselves or just ingrained habits.
Unaware of their own inner mechanics, really.
And Manly P. Hall, you mentioned him too, he talked about being spiritually asleep. Similar vibe.
Very similar. He painted a pretty stark picture, actually. Described the masses as bodies in motion without inner direction.
Oof, that's sobering. Bodies in motion without inner direction.
It is, but it highlights this shared concern, this observation among these thinkers. Hall saw so many people just moving through life without any clear inner purpose, without real self-awareness, just swept along by trends, by what society expects.
Instead of listening to their own internal compass, their own values.
Precisely. Fulfilling roles, going through the motions. But the pilot, the inner guide, is either missing or just not at the controls.
Makes you think about how much genuine presence you actually encounter day to day.
It certainly does. And then you look at Dostoevsky. He wasn't writing esoteric philosophy, obviously, but through his characters.
Oh yeah, incredible psychological depth.
Right. He explores this very thing. His characters often go through immense suffering, terrible inner turmoil. And it's in those crucibles, those really intense experiences,
That their soul gets tested.
Exactly. It's either forged in that fire, strengthened through facing the darkness honestly, or it gets tragically lost.
Yeah.
Crushed by denial, by moral compromise, by refusing to face the pain.
So for Dostoevsky, the soul isn't just some airy concept. It's something real that's shaped or even broken by how we engage with life's hardships, with pain.
Precisely. It's not about avoiding suffering you can't, really. It's about how you meet it. He shows that real soulfulness often comes from confronting the messy, harsh realities inside and out with honesty. Vulnerability, even. Not running away, not numbing yourself.
The struggle itself becomes the proving ground.
Yes. A proving ground for the soul.
Okay, so this all paints a picture of what might be lacking.
Yeah.
But let's flip it. What does it actually mean, according to these perspectives, to have a soul, to not be a shell? What does that look like?
Well, if we synthesize their insights, a being with a developed soul seems to have certain qualities. There's often a deep connection to truth, for one.
Truth beyond just facts and figures.
Yeah, like an intuitive sense of what's real, what matters. Also, a recognition of beauty that goes beyond the superficial, the purely material.
And a moral compass.
An innate sense of right and wrong, yes. One that isn't just learned from society, but felt from within. And crucially, a genuine presence, real self-awareness. You feel an unmistakable inner aliveness, an authenticity.
It radiates outwards, you're saying?
Something like that. And Manly P. Hall, going back to him, really stressed that this isn't passive. The soul isn't just there. He used words like it needs to be built, shaped, forged.
Yeah, like a craft.
Exactly. And he pointed to how, through dedicated inner work, facing yourself, honestly, the good and the bad, cultivating silence, inner stillness.
Getting away from the noise.
Yes. And taking radical responsibility for your own inner state, your thoughts, your reactions.
Oh, it's an active, ongoing construction project in a way.
That's how Hall saw it. A conscious effort, looking within, confronting your own shadows, your limitations, actively building those inner resources, quieting the external chaos to connect with what's deeper.
And that ties back to Gurdjieff's really blunt statement, man has no soul, he must create one.
Right. It hits hard, doesn't it? But it drives the point home. It's not a birthright, not automatic just because you're breathing. It's an active creation. It results directly from conscious effort, from that sustained self-development.
So just being born human gives you the potential, the raw material maybe, but the soul itself is something achieved.
That's the core idea threading through Blavatsky and Gurdjieff especially. The potential needs to be realized, intentionally, and often through difficulty. Which brings us back to that idea of conscious suffering.
Right. You mentioned that with Dostoevsky. How does that fit into developing a soul specifically?
Well, the key word is conscious. Most suffering, Gurdjieff would say, is useless. It's unconscious. We just react, complain, try to escape it, numb it.
Yeah, we avoid it or get overwhelmed by it.
Exactly. But conscious suffering is different. It means facing the pain, the difficulty, whatever it is, with full awareness. Understanding why it's there, what it's showing you about yourself, about life, allowing it to strip away the ego, the illusions.
So instead of letting it diminish you, you use it.
You allow it to refine you, to burn away the dross, you might say. This kind of suffering, embraced consciously, paradoxically becomes fuel, a catalyst for soul growth.
Transmuting pain into awakening is a powerful idea.
Sure.
But what about the other side? How does the soul get lost, or erode, or fail to develop at all?
Well, according to these views, it's often a slow process, a gradual erosion through neglect.
Neglect of what?
Of the inner light, constantly ignoring that quiet inner voice, those intuitive nudges, drowning it out with distractions, with noise, with the endless pursuit of superficial things.
Well, chasing external stuff instead of listening within.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Numbing yourself to the deeper questions, the existential stuff. It's like you slowly turn down the volume on your inner self until you can't hear it anymore.
The inner compass just gets weaker and weaker, lost in the static of daily life.
That's a good way to put it. And unresolved trauma is huge here, too.
How so?
When we don't process deep emotional wounds, when we just bury them or try to power through, that creates fragmentation inside. It prevents integration. It hinders the development of a cohesive, strong, vibrant soul. The energy gets locked up, distorted.
And addiction must play a role too, right? In all its forms.
Absolutely. Whether it's substances or chasing validation or even just constant digital distraction. Addiction creates a kind of void. It substitutes a compulsive craving for authentic connection, authentic presence.
It hollows you out.
It can, yes. And Blavatsky had a really chilling phrase for the extreme end of this. She suggested that in some cases, the soul leaves before the body dies.
Wow. Leaves before the body dies. That's bleak.
It paints that picture of the truly empty vessel, the human shell we started with. Physically alive, biologically functioning, but spiritually vacant. The light's gone out inside.
And these texts sometimes hint, cautiously, that if that inner space becomes truly vacant, something else might move in or influence it.
Yes, there are hints towards external influences potentially filling that vacuum. We need to be careful not to get too speculative about specific entities, perhaps, but the core idea, the consequence of that spiritual emptiness, is a vulnerability.
A vulnerability to what?
To manipulation, to control, whether it's from specific sources or just less wholesome influences in general. When your own inner guidance is gone, you're much more susceptible to external programming.
And that connects to broader societal stuff too, right? Mass media, cultural narratives.
Definitely. Those forces can contribute to the fragmentation. They encourage us to put on masks, to perform roles, to adopt identities that aren't really ours.
So your authentic spirit gets replaced by this performing self. This mask designed to fit in.
That's the danger. You become an actor playing a part, and eventually you might forget who you are underneath the costume. The authentic self gets buried deeper and deeper.
Which sounds a lot like being a shell.
It does indeed. Now, some of these texts, particularly Blavatsky drawing on Gnostic ideas, touch briefly on the very nature of the world we perceive, the idea of a lower creator or architect.
The Demiurge.
Yes, the Demiurge. Blavatsky refers to this as the Lord of the lower kingdoms, the architect of the visible material world. The idea is that this realm, the one we experience with our senses, might itself be a kind of illusion or distortion, a system designed to keep us focused outward, trapped in the material, governed through ego, through fear, through control. And sometimes, they suggest, even institutionalized religion can become part of this system, emphasizing obedience, dogma, external authority over direct, personal spiritual experience. Blavatsky was quite critical of what she saw as the god of this world, the controlling force versus true inner divinity.
So the real divinity is inward.
Silent. That's the contrast they draw. True divinity, or the connection to it, is found within. It doesn't demand temples or intermediaries necessarily, just attention, inner stillness, freedom from those external control systems.
Okay, so if someone's listening and this resonates, maybe uncomfortably, this feeling of being programmed or disconnected, how do you break free? How do you move beyond being a potential shell?
Well, the good news, according to these traditions, is that it is possible. It's not necessarily a fixed state, but it requires work. Conscious, sustained, often uncomfortable work.
Where do you even start?
It begins with inner work. Radical self-honesty, being willing to look at yourself, truly look, and confront The falsehoods, the conditioning, the masks you've adopted.
That sounds hard.
It can be, but it's essential. And silence is often pointed to as a starting point. Real silence.
Not just quiet surroundings.
No, more like inner stillness. Creating space away from the constant mental chatter, the external bombardment, so you can actually hear that quieter, authentic voice inside, if it's still there to be heard.
And Blavatsky talked about inner transmutation, didn't she?
Yes, like an alchemical process, consciously working to purify your inner world, burning away the illusions, the negative patterns through self-awareness, through facing reality squarely inside and out.
And Gurdjieff had his self-remembering.
Crucial. The active effort to be present, to remember yourself here, now, observing your thoughts, your feelings, your bodily sensations without getting lost in them, breaking that automatic machine-like functioning.
So shifting from being lived by your thoughts and habits to consciously observing them.
Exactly. Becoming the observer, not just the reactor. And solitude is often mentioned as vital, too.
Getting away from it all.
Consciously stepping away from the constant input, the external influences, giving yourself space to deprogram, to detox from all the noise and narratives you absorb constantly, to just be with yourself.
So you can start to honestly examine who you are beneath all that, shed the false layers.
Precisely. To hear and eventually trust your own inner voice again. And the ultimate goal, in many ways, is moving beyond just believing things intellectually.
Towards what?
Towards gnosis, direct knowing.
Gnosis. Like personal experience of truth, not just reading it in a book.
Exactly. It's that deep, intuitive understanding that comes from your own direct experience. It resonates in your bones, you know? It's not just a concept you agree with, it's something you know. That's where the real transformation happens.
So it all comes down to personal experience, personal work.
Fundamentally, yes. Awakening, cultivating a soul. It's a deeply personal responsibility. It might be uncomfortable. It might mean challenging the status quo, going against the grain of society.
But it's about becoming authentically yourself.
At its heart, yes, taking ownership of your inner evolution.
So we come back to that question we started with that maybe listeners can sit with.
Are you truly alive or just animated?
Yeah. It's a heavy question. And the answer, as you've laid out from these perspectives, isn't out there somewhere. It's not in this conversation even.
No, it comes from that inward look, that honest self-examination. Courageous sometimes.
And maybe if parts of this discussion resonated, if they struck a chord or even made someone feel a bit uneasy,
then perhaps that's the starting point. That resonance, that unease could be the beginning of their own exploration, their own unique process of, well, waking up.
It's definitely a lot to think about. This whole exploration really invites you to look deeper, doesn't it? To consider the nature of your own being and maybe the potential for something more real, more conscious, beyond the surface, beyond the shell.